project manager, you're not always going to be the one taking the decision, but you're going to be accountable for, and you're there to, if you can't make the decision, you have to go to the right people and get approval for whatever decisions are going to be taken on what you're going to prioritize, whether it's cost, quality, or the schedule. Okay, this is just a recap of the different parts we've just been through. A quick word about the cost. You're going to plan it in your budget and manage and control it. So as you go, you're going to have to check. And you can't wait until the end of the project and say, oh my God, I overspent everything. You're going to have to, just like you did do for your schedule, as you go along, check that you're staying within your cost. It'll be, as we said, activities, resources, materials. You're going to have a constraint. At the beginning, you're going to be told this is how much you have. It probably will be impossible. It'll probably be 50% not enough, but that's how it is, and it's going to be up to you to negotiate. It'll depend. When it's a project internal to a company, that's not so much of a problem. I mean, it's more, typically for the relocation, you're going to say, okay, this is the minimum. If the slowest I can relocate is 0.5 degrees per day. I'm going to need that much fuel. There's the possibility to go faster, consuming more. That's going to be the decision. But the minimum you're going to be able to use, it's not your decision. It's how it is. I mean, you can't change the physics of it. So, yeah, you're going to want to review that. As we said, in case of additional cost, you're going to have to see what they're due to. Are they due to unplanned activities? Are they due to suddenly you realize you didn't have the software that you absolutely need to buy, without which you can't complete what you're going to do? Imagine you're buying a new type of satellite. Right now, most of the satellite fleet they're being replaced between these big shaped beams that we have with high throughput satellites, with very small beams that allow to have more dynamic management of your payload. The management of your customer is completely different, whether it's the customers or even the services. If say you have a plane that's going over the Atlantic, if you have one beam over the Atlantic, you just have your service in that one beam. Once you have all these small beams, you have to manage the change of the information from one beam to the next as your plane moves through the successive little beams. It gives you a huge flexibility. It's also a new software that you're going to need. So this is probably a huge change that you've anticipated. You know you're going to need this, but say you forgot about this. If you need to suddenly add this software or you didn't realize how complex the software was going to be, this comes in and you suddenly need to add cost. Typically, when there's software involved, there's delays or cost involved. I mean, it's typically, however huge your experience is, software never goes as you expect it to be. There's always delays. And when it does go how you expect it to be, the customer wants changes. So, from my experiences, when there's software involved, something's going to happen. So basically, you're going to have to see if there's a planned activity, how that's going to affect whether it's a cost or schedule. You're going to, maybe you can go to your management and say, hey, we've added this, but we have actually changed something to the scope. My project suddenly, we're not just relocating to here, we're relocating and planning another relocation afterwards, and that's why this is going to take 6 months more or be more expensive. It's going to, sometimes it's just more expensive because of something within your scope that's changed or took more time or was more expensive. But sometimes it's actually the scope that's changed. So that's something you're going to have to look at and see and use that to explain why you're over budget. You're going to have to check the impact on the schedule, inform your stakeholders, request additional budget or accept the impact and say, okay, if I'm not getting any additional budget, this is going to be my impact, and we're going to have to do everything manually because we don't have the software, or I'm going to not do this test on the satellite, but hey, if we don't test this space and this part of the satellite, we may not have a redundant unit. Do we accept to launch with this situation? So, yeah, I think a funny example was that one of the satellites, it was one of the early satellites that's already been deorbited, suddenly they realized they were missing a bolt. It was like, okay. And all the tests were going perfectly fine, but they were missing, there's this one piece missing. So what do we do? Do you launch as is? Do you spend huge amounts to try and find it? Do you accept a delay to search for it? Or do you say, okay, all the tests are fine, we redid all the tests that were related to where and everything seems to be going fine. So in the end, they just accepted to go ahead with it, and I think the satellite worked perfectly well. It was a mystery of the ball. I mean, maybe it was just an employee that, I don't think they have pockets, but misplace it, who knows? I mean, total mystery. This thing just, poof. So yeah, these, sometimes you just have to accept it. So I was like, okay, well, it's just, you figure that you've done all the tests and you think it's an acceptable risk. So, there, so that was for the theory. We can go into the actual relocation exercise. So the scope, I think we've discussed enough. You have an idea what it's about. Do you want to spend maybe 5 minutes trying to think about what your work breakdown structure would be like, and then we can sort of gather the elements, or we can actually do this on the board, that's the best. And we can sort of gather the different elements that would be in your work breakdown structure. I'm running out of paper. That'll be good enough. If you had to break down the satellite relocation, what would you include in your breakdown elements?
What do you mean?
So think about everything that you're going to have to do. All the little pieces you have to think about, so that
the things that you have written already, the reason that we want to.
So you know the reason, you know what you're doing, but in terms of activities, each little activity that you're going to do it, how you're going to break it down, so that when you write your schedule, like it's going to be element 1, element 2, element 3, whether they can be done together or not. So right now we're doing it without a schedule, just identifying all the elements that you're going to have to think of.
You have to activate the ground stations.
Yep. So you're going to have one that's going to be ground station.
Would you have to find the new ground station first?
So so you're going to have one that's identified.
Calculate the trajectory.
And activate ground station. Yep, so you're going to have the maneuver plan. So that's the orbit during the relocation.
Make or buy decision for a satellite.
Sorry?
Make or buy decision for a satellite.
No.
Make or buy decision for a satellite. Like, would you want to manufacture yourself, or would you want to procure a satellite?
Make or
Okay, but this is just for the relocation. So you already have your satellite.
Get the approved documents, the certification.
Yep.
And
So the regulatory approval. So to move your satellite, what are you going to have to need while you're moving? What are things that
Communications.
Yeah, so the frequencies to command your satellite. So you're going to have the, call it the TT&C, the telecommunication, telemetry, and commanding. So the different frequencies that you're going to use.
Somehow organize all this, like have a repository or like place in where you work where you can actually have all
Yeah,
this
so actually, yeah,
information
you're right.
together,
The communication with teams.
yeah, or documentation.
Communication with teams. So you may have a folder or document. And then there's going to be another important one, which is kind of linked, is so you're going to have all your teams that are going to be preparing this, but then you're actually going to have a document that's going to go out to the operations center, where you're going to have each sequence of, every minute, actually every second, anything that's important, any activity that's going to take place on the satellite, you're going to have a very precise timeline of what's going to happen. And that's going to have to be produced and kept up to date and sent to the operations center. So the timeline is going to be, it's a form of communication, but this can be just a folder where you have, a list of things that need to be done and who needs to do it and when you want it done by. This is going to be a very strict, with a very specific format that's going to go out to the operations center saying, hey, at 3:31, you need to switch off command frequency 1, because otherwise you're going to interfere. At 3:35, 37, you can bring it back up. At 5:46, you need to do a maneuver. And so you're going to have a very precise timeline, and that's going to be sort of generated from your maneuver plan and things like that. So I don't know if that's the next slide. There. So let's see, we're going to, what we've identified. In the maneuver plan in orbit, so everything that's orbital parameters, so the timeline, the maneuvers, that's all more or less here. The orbital boxes is something you may want to look at as well. In Europe, they typically give you an orbital position plus or minus 0.1 degrees. In the US, it's plus or minus 0.05 degrees. I think it's historical reason. I don't think there's any good reason for that. It's just, and I think, if you actually asked for something else, you could probably get it, but it's become a habit in the US. You just request this, and that's how they've been working. And
Could you repeat the numbers, please?
yes, it's in Europe it's plus or minus 0.1 degrees, and in the US it's plus or minus 0.5.
Okay, thank you.
So, whoops. Oh, interesting. No. There. The drift rate, which is the speed at which you're moving, that's something you may want to know. It's going to be linked to your maneuver. So once you have your maneuver plan, you're going to have your drift rate, because the maneuvers. So theoretically, you can move with a single maneuver. You're typically going to be doing 2 or 3 maneuvers to start your satellite, and 2 or 3. In terms of getting the speed, 1 maneuver would be enough. But you're actually going to be controlling not only your speed, but also the eccentricity of the orbit. And if you just do 1 maneuver, you're going to change your eccentricity a lot. And if you change your eccentricity, you're going to have a variation of your longitude. And you may actually enter the satellite boxes that you're flying above or below. So to control your eccentricity and maintain a more circular orbit that's going to mean less variations, you're going to do this with 2 maneuvers. And the period, the start and end date. So all of this was kind of grouped in the maneuver plan. But these are all informations you may need to actually do your maneuver plan. And the eclipse operations is what I mentioned. So like if you're close to an eclipse period, they're typically around the 21st of September and the 21st of March for about 2 to 3 weeks around these dates, where you're going to be the sun. The sun is going to be very close to the equator, so you're going to have a huge shadow period where the satellite is in the shade of the Earth. So that may trigger additional operations, and you may have a go or no go for doing your relocation during your eclipse. The configuration in terms of frequency, so this is everything that's related to TT&C. So basically you're going to have to identify your primary and backup telemetry frequencies and your primary and backup commanding frequencies. It's probably something that's very straightforward, asking the satellite engineering team, hey, on this satellite, what are the two frequencies for monitoring and commanding? And they probably can give you that right away, but you need to know. There. You need to have the information, because without that, you won't be able to do the flyby notifications when you're to tell the other operators, and it's probably going to be different teams doing the two. So you need to get the information to get it to flow through to the other team to say, hey, we need to inform other operators. First of all, identify who's on the way, identify if you have any other satellites on the way, and inform them, on the 27th of January, we plan to fly above your box, we're relocating a satellite, we're going to use these frequencies, do you have any interference issues with that? Of experience, you all usually think of the other satellite operators, sometimes you forget yourself. And one of the most embarrassing cases we had was flying over one of our own satellites. And the commanding just locked onto the other satellite, and our satellite was drifting, and the commanding was locked onto our other satellites that was using the same commanding frequency. And it took a while to realize what was going on, because it was the right frequencies, and luckily we weren't commanding anything, but it was, yeah. So now we have a big red letter in our procedure saying, watch out also for SES satellites that are in the range. Ground stations said, are we going to use a single station? Is that enough? Do we want to back up? We usually try to have a backup because if there's any issue, whether it's just a ground issue, the station doesn't work, if the weather gets really bad, whatever, and a gateway at the arrival. Because obviously you're going to do service, you need a gateway to uplink your signals. In some cases, it's actually the customers who's uplinking their signals directly. That's really on a case-by-case basis, but you're usually going to have some kind of gateway when you're in operational configuration. The compatibility, that's what I was saying, we were checking the nearby satellites physically, to make sure you're flying above. If you have a satellite that's in the adjacent box, you have to make sure that your stop sequence doesn't go into their box, because you may be flying above. When you stop, suddenly you move closer to the GGO arc again, and you have to make sure you don't get anywhere close. Usually you just try to avoid completely and make sure that you're not entering their orbital slot at all. If for some reason it's necessary, then you may want to coordinate, exchange ephemeris just to make sure you have a safe separation. Ideally, you're going to want to avoid that because it just adds lots of complication to interface and get all of that in there. But it's something you could do. I mean, it's not a big problem to check the separation between two satellites. It depends how easy the communications is with that operator. There are operators that work with similar systems to yours, and it's very easy. Having done some interfacing with Russian customers, it's complicated. Typically the files are different, the conventions are different, so it's just a matter of aligning everything, and if it's just a check for one day, the implementation is just too long to make it worth it, so you'd just rather just go around trying to get into your box directly. But it is feasible. Payload operation, anything that may be necessary, such as generating the configuration to arrive on station. The coverage at the end. So we discussed the transponder activation. There's also the pointing. The satellites usually are they're pointing towards Earth. but you have some flexibility. Sometimes it's very small, sometimes it's a bit larger. To slightly adjust your pointing, to bring it up by 0.5 degree or 1 degree or down. If all your customers are very much in the center of your footprint, that doesn't have a huge impact, but sometimes you're targeting Scandinavia and your footprint is very limited over Scandinavia, so you're going to try and adjust it as much as you can. Maybe this has been done before your relocation, but if it hasn't, you're going to have to check that your pointing is correct as well. The approvals for the orbital slot, that will probably have been done early in advance, but you have to check that it's been done. For the satellite as well, I think they're all kind of linked. They're all done in one go, that you have the regulatory instances are informed that you are moving this satellite to this orbital slot, that you're going to use such and such frequencies for market access in this region. Sometimes for specific areas, typically for India, you have to go through the Indian regulatory, actually for all countries, but in some countries it's more complicated than others because it's very centralized. I think the Asian countries are very, and it's maybe not more complex, but it's markets that we're maybe less used to when there's more. The Americans, there's very direct. SES has a base in the United States. They have direct access to the regulatory in the United States. So the discussions for the market access can be different to the regulatory approvals for the orbital slots. The Earth stations may need some regulatory approvals as well. You're building a station that's going to uplink. Typically in the United States, it's a nightmare. The uplink from the Earth stations can be very difficult, or at least need to be managed. You need to make sure you get things right.
Because of what? Sorry, the time they
The regulatory, they need to give in the frequency that you're going to use and things like that.
It's more information that they request. It's
Yep.
a lot more data.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's related probably to the military. They just want to make sure they don't have any interference. This one we've discussed. The notification to operate to other operators, it's something that we usually have prepared a long time in advance, but we only just do very early once we're almost ready to go. So we're not going to send the operator saying, hey, by the way, in 6 months we're going to fly over your box. Just a week before saying, hey, by the way, we're flying over. Is there anything that we need to adjust? So it's something that's really left so that we don't have to correct and redo it if there's any delays. And then your internal authorization to go. So if it's a new satellite, of course, that's going to be pretty straightforward. But if you're relocating a satellite for a new business, you actually have to get your green light from the management to say, okay, we're finishing the business here, we're going to move it over to this orbital position. So these are all elements, they're kind of grouped into categories. So your next step is going to take all of that and then put them into an actual schedule. So there's the sequence, I grouped them differently just so that you can actually see them. If you want to play around, print and get them each down and play around and remake a full schedule with all the individual ones, you can do it. If I put them on a slide, you won't see anything. But basically how it's going to work is you're going to have a preliminary plan with everything that's related to your maneuvers, everything that's related to your orbital stuff, and your ground station. So you're going to have a full schedule where you identify all this, work on your regulatory approval. So once you know where and when you want to go, identify the ground station, you're going to be able to submit a regulatory approval. And once you get that, get your final plan, which is just going to be a variation of this one, but you'll have the inputs from the regulatory approval here. You may have some additional inputs here if you've identified other satellites that may have interferences and things like that. Once you have this, you're going to have it may have come earlier, but this is probably the latest you want your authorization to move from management. And once you have this, you send out your notification, and then you actually can do your actual relocation. Because all of this was just planning, but then you actually have the execution of your satellite move. And once you get to the final longitude, your OSD is for on-service date, or on-service date. So it's basically how you're going to configure your satellite for the service. So this is a first view, but if you wanted more in a kind of a Gantt chart, what you should do is have each of your little WBS blocks put in to a planning like this. So you're going to, I find it nice to keep them grouped by theme, just so that you kind of understand things. You don't have to do it like that. Some people just like to put them in by sequence. When you have different aspects, it's nice to still be able to see, what's linked to what, and see, okay, you're going to have your drift parameters here. This is going to be week 1. I'm going to get all my information about my commanding, all the actual inputs, all the data I need. Once I have all of that, I can do my regulatory approvals. 1 week is probably hugely optimistic, but okay, this is just for an example. If it's something that was planned, it can be perfectly fine. I mean, if it's something that we knew was going to happen, it's just a matter of informing the regulators, okay, our satellite is there, we confirm that we are going to move as planned, that can be fine. Your final planning done after that. As you're planning, once you get your management green light, you send your flyby notification, and then you actually do your actual relocation. Once you arrive on your target position, so this could be intermediate milestones. They could, or depending on how long your project is, you may want to officialize milestones or not. Set up your configuration, and then declare my satellite is ready for service.
Could you just remind us about how long it takes to move the satellites? There's the difference between the GEO satellites and the LEO satellites. Was it in this class, or was it in another class where we talked about 18 days or something? No, because it's a function of how much fuel you use to,
So yes, it depends how far you're going, right? So you're moving at 0.5 degrees per day, which is the slowest you can move to avoid other satellites. So if you're going to move by 10 degrees, you're going to need 20 days. So it depends on how far you're going.
Okay. So this may or may not be realistic in terms of total time. This here is going to depend on how far you're going. Yeah.
We've had cases where this takes 3 months because you're going 180 degrees. So that's really going. You have you have some control. If you have a strict milestone here, you may say, I can only achieve this if I use more fuel.
Huh.
But otherwise, if your goal is to minimize fuel, then your end date is going to move.
Yeah. And would 6 weeks be a viable option? I mean, a viable timeline for a relocation?
It's really going to. I think.
If you're not
This is
moving
going
so
to
far.
depend on how far you're moving.
Yeah, but if you're not moving, I mean, in general, do you move them far, or?
Yes, we do move. Sometimes you do. Not in this case, not when, if you're launching a satellite, you're probably going to test it very close to your final orbital location. There's no reason to test it at the other end of the Earth, and then you need 3 months to bring it back. So you're going to test it a few degrees apart. If there's no one else at your final position, you could technically test it at your final position. But it would be very close. But recently, we ended a service with a satellite that was close to end of life. We brought in a new satellite, and we used the old satellite to do a bring into use mission that was, I think, almost 100 degrees off. A bring into use is when you're going to activate a frequency that's been booked somewhere at an orbital position. And if you don't reactivate the use, you're going to lose your right to use this frequency at this orbital slot. So you bring it a satellite there just to say, okay, I'm still interested, I'm actually showing that I'm using it. It's something that only big operators can do, obviously, because you actually need to bring a satellite there that you're not going to service with, but just to book your frequency. And in that case, we had a very strict milestone to reach that longitude by a certain date, because our frequency was booked until like 4th of July, and after that we would lose it. So we relocated at a speed that was totally, we relocated at 3 degrees per day, because the priority was to get there in time. So we instead of being just 50 kilometers above the geo orbit, we were practically in the graveyard orbit to relocate the satellite. But this is really exceptional. I mean, it's just something new. If you're actually relocating for an actual, something that's post-launch, you're just going to be a few degrees off. Yes.
When you're relocating, do you go to the graveyard, then move, and then again come back? Or?
You don't go all the way to usually you go 50 kilometers above geo, just to avoid the satellite boxes. No, you can go faster, but you're using more fuel, so except in extreme cases, you're not going to use that. 90% of your relocations, you're minimizing fuel. So you just go there because you have another mission, and overall you just want to optimize your lifetime fuel. So 0.5 degrees per day, or you may go a bit higher, because if it's long, your eccentricity will build up, and then you may want to be a bit higher above your geo arc. But mostly you're going to be in the 0.5, 0.7 degrees per day. So, and the size of these blocks are realistic. It's the different approvals can actually determine, or other external events, and those are going to be really project dependent. What comes in, what affects. Typically, anything else is going to, in our case of our launch, the launch delay and the IoT duration are going to be what changed the week one of our project. As we said, in this case, we don't have that many costs per se, except the people, but they're paid unless we need a specific contractor for something very special. It's going to be people working in the company. Here again, as I said, it's a satellite we've just bought, so there's no reason where you would need to rent a ground station. But imagine this ground station you're building has delays, and you still want, you want to rent one. You're going to rent one until yours is finished. That's something that may come up, and then your fuel cost. So I think in terms of cost, there's not that much that's going to come up in this point. There, so yeah, let's try to get this through. The execution is going to be your actual, your project being accomplished. So you have your schedule, and you're actually rolling it out. So here you've done the hard part of the work, but you have to make sure that things continue to flow smoothly, and follow as much as possible what you've actually planned. This is much going to be about communication and engaging with the different parties and monitoring. Just seeing, where am I? Is this where I want it to be? Do I need to correct anything? The stakeholders are mostly some of them can be, they're going to be part of your team because they're stakeholders, but they're not necessarily going to be active in the rollout of the project. They're more going to be the project. Anyone who's going to use the outcome of the project. So you're going to have to make sure you communicate with them and don't forget about them, and manage their expectations if anything comes up. If everything's going fine, communicate, tell them, yeah, you have nothing to worry about, don't start wondering, things are going fine. But if anything is, if there's any delay, change in scope, let them know. They need to be informed. They're the people who are interested in the project, so you need to stay in contact with these people. And then the risks. It's something you should have thought about from the initiation. You will have started to identify them in the planning phase, but you're going to have to monitor them in your execution and identify how if they can be quantified and if they can be mitigated. Yeah, some people will tell you this has to be entirely done in the planning phase. It's difficult. It doesn't matter. Just make sure you take them into account and to analyze them at some point and see where they can be. It's a difficult question because it's the biggest risk is the one you haven't thought about, and you know, afterwards it's always easy to say, yeah, we should have thought about it. If you didn't think about it, it's not necessarily incompetent. It's just something that had never come up before. So it's always a difficult thing. But we'll look at those in a minute. And then the delivery, the implementation, just as I was saying, kind of the monitoring. Am I doing the right thing? Am I going, you know, towards what I need to do? Am I delivering what I have to do? Is my quality right? I think that the standard is everything on track. Okay, one of the roles of the project manager and one of the things you're actively doing during the execution phase is leading your team. So I don't want this to become a leadership course, but I think we can look at a few points. I think we'll have a few slides on the project manager afterwards. I think that there are a few points during the project management that you can already look at. Is really making sure that you have the right skill set. You know, for each of your elements in your WBS, you have the right person or someone who has the competency to do what you're doing, what he has to do. I think in a project that's being done over and over, it's relatively easy. Your flight dynamics team is going to be taking care of the orbital parameters. Your satellite engineering is going to be taking care of the satellite health. There's not so much questioning about that. But for something that's new, if you're buying new software, do they have the right people? Are they actually, if you don't have that much visibility on who's doing it, you may want to question and make sure that you have the right people doing the right things. Making sure that people are clear about their roles. Often you'll see something failing because 3 people thought that someone else was taking care of it. It's so typical. It's so obvious in the end. But sometimes I was telling you that the commanding and monitoring frequencies of the satellite. It's something you just need to go and look it up and get the information. And sometimes it's one of the last informations you get because everyone says, oh, but flight dynamics can do that. They have the information. We relocated the satellite 2 years ago already. And someone says, yeah, but satellite engineering, you're the ones who designed the satellite. And yeah, but operations have them anyway. They're controlling the satellite every day. Thinking, okay, can someone just look up the frequencies and give them to me? Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's little things like that, but it's important to assign someone and make sure that they know. It's very good that you know, but if they don't know, then you're in trouble. And sometimes it's not big trouble. I mean, if it's just looking up, at one point you can actually walk over, sit down next to them and say, okay, let's do it now. Mm-hmm. But if it's something longer, then it can be more of a problem. And yeah, making sure, same thing, the roles and the responsibilities. When flight dynamics comes with a maneuver plan, you want them to make sure that they're responsible, that they have actually checked that whatever maneuvers they're planning are actually going above the satellite boxes, that they've actually checked that the thruster durations can be used and are applicable. It's straightforward, it's usually part of their jobs, but sometimes it's a bit more than what their usual job is, and you have to make it clear. Are you aware that I'm expecting this from you? And whatever you're giving me, you will be responsible for. I will be responsible as project manager, but for this part, I'm counting on you. And just for it to be clear, I think in terms of communication, it's important that everyone knows what they're up to. Your stakeholders, it's always difficult to know. Yes, go ahead.
Do you have like a quality assurance personnel who is continuously auditing this process?
We have quality people, quality. We have, for a long time, we had an operational excellence team that was reviewing these things. It's been renamed, and I'm not sure exactly how it's being handled now. But yeah, there's both the internal audit that checks the actual processes. But yeah, there is quality assurance that's done on this.
That is real time or?
No, I don't. There's definitely some real time for the satellite procurement for this big project. Yes. For things like relocation and things, I haven't seen any real time. I think there's more a check, an overall check of the coherence of the process in the company. So your stakeholders, it can be kind of tricky to identify all of your stakeholders, but overall it's going to be internally your project team and your management, and external or not, it's going to depend on your project, any users, suppliers, contractors that are going to be involved in your project. They can be internal as well, but these are the things, people you're going to have to think about and maintain contact with. You have to understand, to best communicate with them, you have to understand what they're expecting. And some people like to be involved and know how things are going. Some people just want to be sure they're going to have a final product with a given quality. And it's just good to touch base with them to say, okay, things are on track. Typically, the sales teams who are going to sell the satellite capacity, they don't really care about the details of the satellite relocation. They're interested as to whether the satellite will be there on time, and they want to be informed as to when the satellite will be ready and when they can start selling. They like, if it's going to be delayed, they like to have some information as to why. Is it a launch delay? Is it an issue on the satellite? Then they like to have more communication, but if everything's on track, it's just nice to give them a reminder saying, hey, everything's on track, we're still good to go on this date. And it's nice to just have periodic reminders saying, we didn't forget about you, we're still there. So yeah, depending on the cases, you'll have to decide how you communicate with them, regular email, teleconferences, actual meetings, going to see them individually. That is really going to be a case by case thing. It's when you get to know them, you're going to have to meet them at the kickoff meeting. You may ask them, you can just say, hey, how would you guys like to be informed? More and more we have these, the companies have these folders where you can just dump the information, people have to go look for it. Some people actually like that because it's very easy to push information there, and then whenever they're curious, they can go and have something that's very up to date. Some people are overwhelmed with work. If you tell them, well, when you're interested in just going look, they're going to say, whoa, no, I have other things to do. I would just like to have a short message weekly to tell me where things are. So ask. It's the best way to manage the expectations. Hopefully they'll tell you what they really want. Sometimes you kind of have to guess or they say something and then you realize it's not actually working, because they're not getting exactly what they want. So ask and adjust. But typically, it's going to be different depending who you're talking to. So you saw there's a project team, the external stakeholders, and your management. What you communicate and how you communicate is going to vary. To your management, they don't want too many details. They want to know what the progress update is, what the issues are. They want to be contacted for risks. They're the ones who are actually making the calls for the risks. They're going to give you what their expectations are. The team is more kind of a mentoring, coaching. It's a relationship with it's more day-to-day and managing the project. So it's really about giving the direction, getting the action item out. This is what we need to do. This is what you need to do. This is what this team needs to do. These are my delivery dates. This is when it needs to be done for. And then the external stakeholders, it's about the updates and telling them, if you're above budget, are they the ones who are going to pay more? If they're the customers saying, hey, I can't do it for this budget. What you guys, how do I want to handle it? Do you want a bit less, or do you want to pay more? With your team, what else can we say? It's my experience is that regular meetings and face-to-face as much as you can, if they're in the same location as you, is what works best. But they're not always in the same location as you, so sometimes teleconferencing is your best option. If you can travel, that's wonderful. As budgets go down, you can travel less and less. So again, see what makes it work the best. Skype works really well. So it's becoming the modern way of communicating, and it's the next best thing to directly seeing people. So whether it's Skype or whatever software your company is using, but there are ways of dealing with long distances. And again, adjust as you go, but make sure the objectives are clear and the roles and responsibilities for each one in your team are clear. Other things you need to do with your team. So I think with regular meetings, you're monitoring the progress. As soon as you see you're moving away from your initial roadmap, identify that and make decisions. Say, are we accepting this new road? Why? Or do we need to make a corrective action? That's something you're going to be needing to discuss with your team. And get the approval from the team, and if necessary from the management if you need to correct things. If you're during your relocation, your payload team says, we need an extra week for the yoga testing, you're going to have to go back to your flight dynamics team saying, hey, we need a new maneuver plan, we're not starting on the 15th, we're starting on the 19th. Get them in there, explained, and get the new plan, say, okay, we need a new plan, when do we need it for, and things like that. Stakeholders, I think we've discussed. They may want some specific documentation. That should be clarified at the beginning of the project, and you need to make sure you get that on time to them. Typically at milestones, they will want, whether it's the official critical design review, preliminary design review, or whether it's just an email with status. That's all things to be agreed upon. Management usually wants to know everything but have very little time, so keep things concise, clear, and highlight what you need to get from them. Usually you're going in with an expectation as well. They're just expecting information, but when you're going to see management, very often you need to get something from them, whether it's a reply to, I identified this risk, can we live with it, or do we really need to do something? Do we need to change something to our plan because we cannot accept this risk? So it's something you're going to have to, if you go into a meeting with management, make sure you know what you will get out of it, and don't go out before you have the answer to your question. And if you don't, then highlight it and say, hey, I'm going out, but I don't have an answer to this question. I think you have to make sure you're clear about what you don't have. It's like, hey, I can't go forward without this. I'm stuck. It's your responsibility to give me an answer to this. The communication, really, it's something you can decide at kickoff in the very beginning what everyone prefers. You can identify some tools somewhere, whether it's Dropbox or, others. Sometimes just, some people like to just create a WhatsApp group. If that works, fine. I mean, as they say, whatever works. If it's a small group and everyone's happy with just, hey, let's WhatsApp group, we each have our phone numbers, and we'll post something in there if something happens, and if we need each other, hey, fine. I mean, that's it. If everyone agrees on it, if someone says, hey, but I don't have a phone, I don't want to use this, then you have to take it into account. Usually it's not going to happen, but agree on something. Yeah, what you communicate as well. It's basically going to be, you know, a decision each time. Are you going to use email or phone, team meetings or shared documents, status meetings or face-to-face? There's no good, there's no bad solutions, just it's all decisions on what works best. Transparency in your team is key. I mean, except maybe, as we were saying, for the buffer zones, you may want to hide them slightly, but keep people informed on what's going on. It's really fundamental to go forward. The tools you're using, it's going also to be a trade-off. Is how much you can invest time on making super detailed Gantt charts and things like that. If it's eating up your time to do this for a small project, forget it. Do something that works, and the tool is there to help you, not to make it to take your time. So you have to identify which tool is the best to help you without consuming too much time. And if it's a new project, it can take some time to. You think this tool isn't going to help you this time, but it's going to. Once you learn to use it, you'll be able to use it for 5 or 6 projects after this one. Then it's probably worth an investment. And sometimes it's a mistake. You thought it would be super practical, and it ends up being a waste of time. Okay, that happens as well. But sometimes it's worth the investment. Sometimes you see from the beginning, it's like, okay, they want me to this huge document, but I'm just wasting my time. So find what works for you. For medium projects, I find that often the simple tools are the best. So if you can do a Gantt chart with Excel, and that works for you, and that allows you to communicate, to interface with the documents you're getting, super. At least if you're used to using Excel. If you hate Excel, find something else. Make sure you keep things up to date, as intuitive as possible. Sometimes the projects are huge, it's not easy, and well presented. It's kind of silly, it's kind of obvious, but as a project manager, you're going to be judged on what people see of you, and what they see of you is often the document you're presenting. And it's going to give an impression of you. So sometimes it's super important to spend some extra time to make it just look good and easy to understand. It can be time consuming to put colors in Excel, but it's going to, and it's a pain. Sometimes you just think, the information is there. Why do I have to spend all this time making it look nice and having a nice color frame? It makes a whole difference. It's incredible, but it's the first impression people have when they see documents, if there are typos in it. If you typed 2018 instead of 2019, everyone knows it's 2019, it's just a typo, but it's going to give an impression that you're not following this, even if it's not true. Sometimes you've been on this document for so long that you just don't see it anymore. You just concentrate. Then get someone else to read it, or close it and reread it the next day. But getting that info through and getting that first impression is super important.
I have a question.
Yep.
Given a situation, say in a project where you have to send an update
Yes.
of a status, say every year,
Yeah.
so would you rather keep even the management, because the thing mentions that you have to make sure that everybody is in the loop, but sometimes too much of information for the management is also
Yes,
a bad thing for the project.
Get their inputs. I know sometimes you have these updates that get, you have distribution lists of 115 people, and if sometimes it's just a pain, and you end up deleting them and you miss the important one. So it's good to try to identify, you know, and have subgroups and say these are the guys who get all the details, these are the guys who get the information at milestones, and adjust your distribution lists. And some managers will say, I don't want them all. And they won't be reading them, but sometimes they just want everything, and then what can you do? I mean, if they've asked for it, you won't deny it to them. So, but then it's their responsibility, right? They can't say you're overloading my mailbox if they asked for it.
So would you rather like go by a form in the initial planning stage and like send it out all to the stakeholders to get their input of which part of the communications that they want to be?
Yeah, I think at the kickoff meeting, it's a good question to ask. How much information do you, how often do you want it? Do you want to be involved in, you know, all the updates? Typically when we're running the relocations, the timeline that has all the details, our minute by minute updates, is sent to an incredible amount of people. And it's super important to send out the first one, which is the preliminary, the one at the kickoff of the relocation, and then 90% of the people shouldn't get anything else before the end of the relocation. It should be just the operational team, unless something unexpected happens. But if a maneuver is changed by 4 minutes, because once you assess the first one, the second one has to be adjusted. And typically it's still sent to everyone. And it's, some people will complain because the revisions are numbered, and if people get the number 2 and then number 7, they're not going to be happy. So you keep them in the loop, but typically what I try to do in these cases, when people tell, sometimes it's not your decision, you're told, just send it to everyone, it has to be, I don't want anyone telling me they haven't been informed. I try to have a line at the top. What they say is typically, people will read the 5 first lines of your email. If the information isn't there, forget it. Yeah. And put in there, no major changes except maneuver time. And then they know if they want to read it or not. And then you can have, for those who think there's a big impact, they'll go into the details. But at least in one line they can see, and they can, store it in a different folder, delete it, whatever. But at least in one line, or even in the subject line, saying revision 4, update of maneuvers. And if revision 4 is delayed by 3 weeks, you can be sure people are going to open and read the details. But they can say if it's just update of maneuvers, okay, that's fine. Okay, just a few slides on risk management. It's very difficult to do risk management kind of in a vague kind of context because it's always different, and risk is about understanding what you don't know what's going to happen. So it's always kind of difficult, but with experience you kind of know where your uncertainties are. So it's important to understand the context, to identify them, assess them, and plan some responses, and already at least know when you have to be ready for it and what's not acceptable, what you can't live with. If there's a risk that you can't live with, you have to change something to your plan. If you know that by relocating the satellite you're using a thruster that may fail, and that you may have a satellite that's going around in your geostationary orbit forever and being in the way of all the other satellites, you may want to reconsider whether you want to do this or not. Can you do it with another thruster, or do you want to cancel it? But it's something you need to flag now and say, okay, well, I've identified something that's super important. And then you'll have to see whether it's highly likely or not likely, and make kind of a decision there and communicate it. So understanding the context, basically that's understanding your project, and so each of your elements, seeing is there a risk associated. I think that's relatively straightforward. Identifying your risk, you can read about this on the internet. There's loads of ways. There are different aspects of risks. I think when we're talking space, we're going to be talking mostly technical risks. There can be some legal risks sometimes. I mean, we were talking about the regulatory approvals, or if you need to terminate a contract for a customer, there may be some legal risk involved. Economic impacts, and the reputation when you have a satellite failure, things like that, or when you, if you're causing an outage to customers, that can have an impact to the reputation of the company. And that's a risk that's really difficult to quantify. It can be huge, and it can be a risk that you're not ready to accept. The best way to deal with this is to try to have experienced people in your project, and to have them tell you, okay, these are the risks I can identify. If you're used to doing this, you may know on your own, but if you're less used to the topic, having experienced people is really key to identifying the risks.
Is there any way to calculate the risk?
There are ways, yes. There are statistical methods, and it's not everything, but I think typically for satellite health, you have the data of your company. You can try to work with other operators. It will work not always well, but some are ready to share some information. And like we've had so many cell failures on the solar panel. If you have we're starting to have a large fleet, so you can see all of this type of satellites. They have this type of failure. What's the risk of this happening on my satellite? It's things that you can do. And then it's still a risk, and it's still statistics. So what your answer is just about as difficult as measuring the risk.
I think that, for example, for the technical risk, it's the circumstances may be much harder than the environmental ones.
And also the impact of them. There's the likelihood, and we'll see that when you make a matrix. There's identifying how likely, and then the impact of, like, does it just make one of your elements not redundant? So if you're losing one heater but you have the other, is that acceptable? Or is it going to blow up your satellite? So the impact can be completely different depending on your risk. So yeah, that's typically what you're going to do. You're going to make a matrix and look at the different risks and saying, okay, where do I stand? Is it low? There's low likelihood. It's probably not going to happen anyway. There's a good chance, or it's going to happen, whatever happens, and what the impact is. And depending on, if it's probably not going to happen, and if it happens, it's not very important. You're just going to say, okay, I'll take the risk and I'll live with it. If it's either a little bit more likely or a little bit more impact, you're going to say, okay, what can I do to avoid, or at least to mitigate it? Is there anything I can do to, the thruster performance, I'm not sure I can actually use that with this doing a long maneuver. Well, maybe we can try doing the relocation using 2 maneuvers instead of 1. And then we just avoid or at least adjust a little bit. But sometimes you're just going to say, okay, this is low impact enough that I'm going to accept it. And then you have the series of, low impact, but it's going to happen. You're going to monitor and try to mitigate, find an alternative, or find a way around, or something that make it not as impactful. Same thing if it's a medium likelihood, medium impact. This is the impact, sorry, I keep putting that here. Or if there's a high impact with a very low risk of it happening, what's my risk of a solar panel failing during my relocation? It's very low. It's just as low as when you're in orbit. So you're just going to say, okay, we're just going to handle it just like during operations and not do anything specific for that. Do you have a question? Oh, sorry. So it's going to be, sometimes you can actually calculate what the likelihood is, and sometimes it's just going to be your experience. And same thing, impact on reputation, it's going to be the sales team or your management team's experience. It's difficult to evaluate. If you leave a satellite in geostationary orbit without reorbiting it, reputation for your company is not going to be good, how bad is it going to be? That's always difficult to. Are the customers going to leave because you did that? Probably not. Are the other operators going to say, yeah, that's not a very professional way of working? Yes, probably, but is that going to change? But still, you don't want that to be on the internet, and so it's hard to evaluate exactly what it is, so it's a matter of really deciding how you're going to manage that. So for anything that's probably going to happen, or that you know is going to have a high impact, you're definitely going to have to do something. Monitor it, definitely manage it, and inform your management and your stakeholders that you have this risk. You should come, if possible, with a plan. This is what we can do about it, this is what we can't, and if you don't, tell them, okay, for this we don't have a plan. We don't know what to do at it. Do we still do the project? Do you have an alternative way of doing things? They will never accept it, so it's more going to be a matter of do we have a complete way around it, or do we give up the project because it's just not acceptable? So this is very theoretical, and it's kind of difficult to discuss it. So as we go do the different projects, we'll try to put in a few matrices just to see how we can actually work with them. The risk and responses, as we said, you can accept it, you can mitigate it or reduce it. You can transfer it. It's not always easy to explain, but saying, okay, I'm not ready to take this risk, but I can transfer it and get a contractor, and they're going to take the risk. Saying, if the risk is like, I'm not sure I have enough workforce to do this, saying, okay, we'll transfer him to a contractor, and then it's up to his business to make sure he has enough people. That's the kind of risk that you can transfer. The risk on your satellite, it's not easy to transfer, right? So some things can be transferred, some cannot. The monitoring review of risk, that's something you're going to be doing like for everything else during your project. And communicating, being very clear about what the risk is, it's the only way you can make decisions, right, if you know what's going on. To deliver your project, you're going to have to measure your project, you have to measure the progress. We discussed during the initiation how you're going to collect the information and compare with your current path. Typically, you're going to see you have your initial cost, resource, and duration, and you're going to compare with what you actually have. Chances are you're going to be in the wrong balance, and then two options. Bring it back on track with corrective actions, or adjust your baseline plan, saying, okay, I need these additional things, I'm going to accept that and adjust my plan so that your projects should stay along with your roadmap. It can be interesting at the very end of your project to go back to your very first roadmap and see the difference. But that's mostly a curiosity thing, right? So quick recap, risk execution is about leadership communication, dealing with the different people involved, managing your risk, and executing and delivering. So I think, you're over time. We can start with the execution of the relocation next time. I think there's just the closure, which is very short. So let's do the relocation execution next time. We'll do the closure, which is very quick. And then next time we'll do a full exercise on the satellite reorbiting. So bringing it from the geostationary to radar orbit at end of life. So if you have time and you're curious, you can maybe look a bit on the internet, see what you find in terms of regulations for deorbiting satellites. And see what, just go with an open mind. I won't say anything because otherwise you'll look at something specific, but what you find from different regulatory instances, you'll find different things. So don't spend hours on it. It's just out of curiosity to see a bit of what you find, and Suppose someone comes to you and say, hey, I have a geostationary satellite, I have to bring to graveyard orbit. What do I have to do? What's the minimum that's required from me? What do international instances, or what does my country expect me to do with my satellite? So, just so you get an idea of all the different things that are expected, different, everything that's going on in the field.
I might have a last question, just a general question. So
Sure.
in SES or in the industry itself, the project managers who handle these kind of projects, are these mostly people who have been in operations or maybe research side of things, or people who have just come up, say, not having a lot of background from satellite or the industry as such, but more of having a, say, project management certificate?
There's a bit of both, actually. There's some who have evolved from operations, and that usually works very well. Sometimes you have external consultants who come for that, and it makes it very difficult. Because they have a very more structured way, but it doesn't always come in line with the operational. So for the very technical project, it's very much people from operations. But I say operations, but they haven't necessarily worked in operational teams, so they still don't always get the feeling of what it's like to be in operations and how critical it can be. They're just not knowing you, because you can't go up to your satellite, and actually when you don't have some measures and telemetry, people tend to want answers, and sometimes you just don't have the answer. You can't measure it, you can't. Typical questions like, what's the maximum load, what's the maximum number of services I can put on the satellite? They'll say, yeah, specifications tell me this, but I still have some margin. It's like, how much? And says, well, I don't know, because the tests haven't been done by the manufacturer. If I put more services, it's going to take more power, it's going to heat up more. We can try one by one, but I can't tell you can go ahead and sell 6 more transponders. So, it's not always easy, but it's mostly people who have some contact with the operational team. So, the main people who are doing it now have contact and know the teams well enough. So there is some contact and some understanding of the operational world. So unfortunately, I can't be there next week. Maria was telling me that next week it doesn't seem to be much time for you to catch up. So I think we'll be doing, so the following Wednesday I think is the 23rd, and I think this Friday 25th in the morning could work as well. If that works for you.
Can you tell us the dates again?
Yeah, I'll look here in the calendar too.
Sorry?
I have the calendar of the classes here that
Okay.
I can check. So what date are you asking?
So next week I can't be here Wednesday morning. Is there another day that would work for you?
Okay.
And the proposal, which date you said?
I was going to do Friday 25th in the morning.
Really,
I mean, yeah.
if you need to do it, fine, but that's the only, we're told we weren't gonna have things on that day, and so that's the only day to organize other things.
Yeah.
So appointments
Okay.
and travel plans and,
Okay.
you know, kids.
Yep. Are there days that work for you, or
Let's look at the schedule here to see if we have a blank, maybe something.
you have next week? I think anything.
So for example,
It does Wednesday afternoon work?
on the
Some
23, we have classes in the morning, right?
So
On the
like,
23, not next week.
On the
No.
23rd doesn't change.
But on the afternoon we don't have classes. So
Yeah, but I was
maybe
thinking I can do
Just
full
tomorrow.
day, but that may be a bit too much of a full day, 6 hours in a row of project management.
I mean we would have like the lunch,
Yeah,
the middle,
if it's an
but
option.
no problem.
that would
because
be-
we will already
I'm
be
sure
here.
that we have
After
nothing.
lunch, no.
What?
23,
Okay.
sure.
23 in the afternoon we don't have classes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an option.
Because then we have like the normal class in the morning, we have lunch, and then we come back, I don't know, 2 or 1. Yeah, whenever we prefer.
That should work. If that's easier than the 25th, that's absolutely fine with me.
Which days?
The 23rd.
23rd.
After.
Afternoon, I don't know.
After
I think that's
Will we get
what
an
you're-
email about it?
It's
I
better,
can
yeah.
ask
You
Maher
just come
to-
once.
I don't
and-
have all of your contacts, but I can ask Maher to,
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
update the,
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
they
exactly.
will
Online.
do or whatever. Okay, let's do it like that. Then we do 23, we'll do 3 hours in the morning, a break, and then 3 hours in the afternoon.
And the next week, 16th, no class. You can already.
So next week, yes, no, I
Okay,
have,
okay.
we have someone coming to visit us, yes, and
Okay.
they've asked me to do a presentation in the operations center, so I'm stuck there. And when I looked at my calendar, I was looking at September, I thought it wasn't Wednesday, so I said yes, but then afterwards it was too late to change, so we'll just adjust.